Top of Mind, the Dr. Patrick Slowinski Show.
We just got out of a big election that President Trump has been in office for over 5 months, almost 6 months now. And, but really, people that are in Congress, I was on the Hill for a little bit as a chief of staff, they're always running for election. They never stop. And so tonight we have somebody that is from neighboring Maryland, Chris Burnett, who's a retired lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps, Semper Fi, and he's also an attorney, and he really cares about getting that conservative voice out there in Maryland and winning in 2026. So I've invited Chris to come on. He's also a family man. He's really interested in bringing values to Maryland and up on the Hill as a congressman. So Chris, welcome to Top of Mind, and please just for the beginning, just tell us a little bit about yourself that I haven't touched on yet.
Great. Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion with you tonight. But as you mentioned, I spent 22 years on active duty as a United States Marine. I retired out of MAR-4 Cyber, or Marine Forces Cyber Command. That's here in Maryland at Fort Meade. That was co-located with the National Security Agency, or NSA, and Cyber Command. And that was a fascinating way to end my career. But over the course of my career, I had 5 combat deployments. And during those deployments, I had an opportunity to advise at the tactical level and with boots on the ground with a battalion, all the way up to combatant commanders in Southern Command, as well as CJTF OIR. And over the course of that career, I had an incredible experience leading Marines, advising commanders, and starting a family. And as we got to the point where it was ready to retire, my wife and I made the decision that we were going to stay here in Maryland, raise our 4 kids here in Montgomery County. But that also begged the question, if we're going to stay here, do I start another career, having retired as recently as February, or do I take a stand and try to fight for the values that I think are important, not only to my family, but to other conservative families across Western Maryland? And my goal, now having just left active duty, is to try to make Western Maryland red again, and do everything we can to give a voice to some folks that feel disenfranchised and somewhat forgotten by the political process.
Well, thank you, Chris. And tell us a little bit about District 6. It's Western Maryland, but what are your constituents like in terms of kind of demographic background, and
Yeah.
just what are they telling you when you're out there trying to win their hearts and their votes eventually?
And that's a great question, because Western Maryland is probably one of the most diverse districts in the country. You're talking about northern Montgomery County, which is um, it couldn't be any more affluent. It's one of the most wealthiest and one of the most well-educated counties in the country. Just north of northern Montgomery County, you have Frederick. Frederick was primarily a rural county, and over the last several years, due to the increasing cost of living, particularly in Montgomery County, you've had a demographic shift. You went from primarily rural to now you have the city of Frederick being primarily an urban population that has shifted the politics there from leaning heavily conservative to now leaning a bit more Democratic. Just north of Frederick, you get into Washington County, or Hagerstown, and Hagerstown has been plagued by a lot of the recent decline we've seen in mid-size semi-rural cities. And that is, there's issues of unemployment, drug use, high crime, low opportunity, but still getting into more of a rural area with a tremendous amount of potential, but somewhat struggling right now. Just past Washington County, you get into Allegheny, and Allegheny is the length of the Panhandle in Maryland, and that is primarily rural, and it's a smaller population, primarily conservative and leaning to the right. And then finally, all the way out in the very end of the Panhandle is Garrett, which is also a strongly conservative area, very rural, very much agriculture and hospitality sector. So across that very diverse collection of counties, you go from urban northern Montgomery County to about as rural and agricultural as you can get in Garrett. And trying to align messaging across that district is challenging.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, Maryland is an interesting state. I have to think of Maryland in the same time I think about Vermont. And let me finish. I don't think Maryland as kind of far out there left as Vermont is, but Vermont often has a Republican governor. but they're not going to have Republican Congress people usually. So I guess what the question is, even though we've had Republican governors like Larry Hogan in Maryland, why is it so difficult to get? You have a total of 7 or 9 congressmen in Maryland in the state. Forgot how many you guys have.
I believe it's 8.
8, and out of them, only one is a Republican, right?
That's right, the Eastern Shore.
Right. So why is that happening still? And what are you guys doing on the ground to try to change that in 2026?
Well, and that's a great question because I really think there's a common thread through the district and across Maryland of fiscal responsibility and conservative values. But I think at times, just given the nature of Maryland's proximity to DC and some of the historical alignment to the Democrat Party, it's hard to change people's behavior. And what we've been doing primarily in Western Maryland is we've started an initiative where we're working with a lot of the local Republican and conservative clubs to try to get them to utilize a phone calling system called Numenar to identify low and mid propensity Republican voters to try to get them on the permanent mail-in ballot roster. And the idea there is that we're no longer going to leave votes on the floor. These are individuals that would vote Republican and just haven't. And we haven't taken advantage of mail-in balloting the same way the Democrats have. So we're going to try to level the playing field by focusing on Garrett, Allegheny, and Washington counties in particular to get those low to mid propensity voters registered on that permanent list, get those ballots in their mailbox ahead of the primary next year, and see if we can bump up 30 to 40% participation. And then as we get into Frederick and Montgomery County, the issue is a little bit different. It's not that you have as many low or mid propensity voters, you have a large population of unaffiliated voters. So these are individuals that you won't necessarily have a chance to campaign before the primary because it's a closed primary. So you've got to align your messaging so that you can maximize your Republican base in the primary, but also you've got to connect with those unaffiliated voters as you get into the general election. So it's going to be a multi-pronged approach to mobilize the base, engage the unaffiliated, and then try to get some of our center-leaning Democrats to come our way to vote in favor of lower taxes, less regulation, and creating opportunity across Western Maryland.
Well, it's a big job that you have ahead of you, but I think there is room there. I think other people that I've talked to about this, you and I have discussed this on the phone before, there's real opportunity out there. I kind of think you guys need a Scott Presler type of phenomenon who is really critical in President Trump's victory in Pennsylvania. Just an amazing establishing an organization that gets out there and gets people registered to vote. Because I do believe, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that I think people in Maryland feel very similar to people in Pennsylvania on many of the issues. And so I think if you could tap into some of those organizations that were so successful for President Trump in 2024, I think that's one thing. That's my advice. But my question for you is, what is it about the DMV, the District, Maryland, and Northern Virginia that just stays blue for so long when many of us see that we hate these policies, but many of our neighbors and friends just keep voting Democrat?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with everybody wants to be heard. Everybody wants to have their voice heard. And I think everybody wants to be seen. And I'll get to the heart of your question, but I'll start with Garrett and Allegheny counties. They're outside of the DC
Those two are.
market. So they're actually outside of a lot of the news cycle, whether it's TV, radio, or otherwise. They feel completely disconnected from the rest of Maryland and certainly from the greater DC area. So I think the fact that they haven't been listened to and the fact that they haven't had a voice has left them somewhat disenfranchised. And again, in Garrett, I'll use the example, there's over 28,000 registered Republicans. And any given year, you're lucky to get between 7,000 to 8,000 participating. So we're leaving those votes on the floor because we know that there's registered Republicans. We know we could rely on them, but because they don't feel like they have a voice or because they've been able to participate in any meaningful way, they simply don't participate. And then I think as you get down into Frederick and Montgomery County, I think there's a tendency here because you've got so many federal workers and because you have so many people that are dependent on the federal government, there's a tendency to lean a little bit left, whether it's because they want to feel good about certain policies that may not affect them directly, or it's just a bit of a groupthink. But I am always amazed that when I talk to people one-on-one and we strip away labels of Republican or Democrat, most of them agree with Republican policies, Republican values. Yet, despite that agreement, they seem to vote Democrat whenever when they're left to their own devices. So my job is to try to highlight those common values, those common sense arguments, and try to get people energized about voting Republican, and then trying to get some Democrats also to look and see where we have alignment and where we can actually make progress for Western Maryland.
So I don't know if you know about my background a little bit, but I'm a student and a professor of psychology.
Mhm.
And I think one of the problems that we have as conservatives is we primed ourselves in psychology. When you prime yourself to an idea, it's sort of like anchoring yourself to something, and it's very difficult to get away from it, to the idea that conservatives can't win in this part of the country. And
Yes.
so what that does is it stops good people. Well, it didn't stop you, and I'm a big fan already. But it stops good people from running for office if they're conservative, because they're like, what's the point? I'm gonna get people at work to hate me. I'm gonna out myself as a conservative. No one's
Yes.
gonna vote for me. I'm gonna spend a lot of money. But what are you seeing when you actually go out and talk to people and they thank you for getting in the race?
Well, I'm always a little surprised by what you just described. I mean, I've had people come up to me and say, "Why are you doing this? There's so many other things. You've spent your life serving our country. You were a lawyer for the Marine Corps. You were a leader in the Marine Corps. Why not just go and do something else?" And my answer is always the same. Whenever I retired in February, my wife and I agreed that we were going to stay here. There was no more moves, there was no more deployments. So for the first time in almost 25 years, I got to choose where I wanted to live. And so I'm choosing Western Maryland, Northern Montgomery County. And if that with that choice, I'm also choosing to run for Congress because I don't want to be on the sidelines of a fight that I feel like I can influence. And when I tell people that this has been, I see this as an extension of my service. I see this as part of what I did in the Marine Corps, whether it was in Iraq or elsewhere. I see this now as an opportunity to lead by example, to try to set the conditions for other people to succeed, and to address that expectation head on. That being a Republican doesn't mean you expect to lose. It means you're going to have to make a better argument to try to compel people to get out of their comfort zone and vote with their conscience, make an informed vote that's going to be help them and their neighbors to prosper and do much better than we've been doing. Because I think we've seen how poorly the state of Maryland has been managed, and it's been primarily under Democratic leadership for recent years, outside of Governor Hogan, who was a bit of an anomaly in an otherwise Democrat controlled state.
Well, I'm going to share with you my experience. I like to be involved in my community in certain things. So I'm always an election official. If I can get time off work and I can make it work, I go to my precinct that I'm assigned to, and we spend about 15 hours. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've ever done it, but you start like 5 o'clock in the morning. You start setting up the polling station. You go through all this stuff. But in Northern Virginia on the 17th of June, I had to constantly tell voters, you're here for the Democrat, and I said Democrat, not Democratic, but you're here for the Democrat primary, correct? And I often got the response, is there anything else? Because we couldn't field those candidates for those positions, right? So we just didn't have enough to even primary, or we made the decision that this is our candidate, we're going to go with them. But in your particular case, I think it's good. You may have a primary opponent from the Republican Party. It's not clear yet, but you were telling me about that. So you've got that first election coming up, potentially primary election in June, so less than a year away.
Yes.
And then you got the big one if you are successful in the primary in November. So why don't you take the listeners through, if any of our listeners are thinking about running for office, how do you pull this together in less than a year?
Well, I describe it as a lot like starting a new business. When I talk to volunteers, and I talk to the central committee members, I talk about, we're in the business of ideas, and that we have to build an organization to support and present those ideas. So what you first have to start with is why you're running. What is compelling you to go through this process? And then, is that decision to run, is it going to resonate with enough people to not only support you, but to go out and knock on doors for you, to go out and to donate money on your behalf. And then as you start to build out why you're running and what you're going to champion, and your ability to encourage those folks to support their values through your campaign, you start to build out a network. And through that network, over the course of weeks, months, and in this case, almost a year, you try to build enough momentum to move the needle. And in the case of Western Maryland, we're going to have to move the needle quite a bit. Last time around, April McClain Delaney won by about 25,000 votes. And a lot of that was after the polls had closed, and it was about a 4-to-1 ratio on mail-in ballots that she beat Neil Parrott. And to Neil's credit, that was his third time running for Congress. He had an incredible ground game. He has a tremendous amount of name recognition, and he wasn't able to close that gap. My goal is to pick up where he left off, to build a campaign from day one that has a strong grassroots connection, both in terms of volunteer support and fundraising, and to build a campaign designed for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to win so that we can give Western Maryland a conservative voice and to put conservative values back at the forefront. Because think about what's happening right now. We don't have anyone representing us in any way, shape, or form. Delaney is not doing anything in Congress, and she certainly isn't pushing forward conservative values. So we have to put together a campaign and win so that we have a spot at the table. We have the ability to advocate for our needs and interests in Western Maryland. And most importantly, we need to send Do-nothing Delaney back to her $4 million mansion in CD8. She actually lives in Raskin's district. So if she wanted to represent her interests and her neighbor's interests, she should run for CD8. She certainly is not experiencing what most of us are experiencing in CD6 in terms of cost of living, difficulty creating opportunity, and having to deal with school boards that are simply out of touch with our children's needs.
So how's that possible if she lives in Raskin's district that she can run in District 6?
All you have to do is live in the state where you're running. There's no requirement that you live in the congressional district that you're going to represent.
Well, I hope that's a point. I don't know, maybe Victor, if you feel differently because you're a lot younger than I am. But when I find out somebody's a carpetbagger, I don't really like that. And it kind of turns me off. You should live in the community. It always in the community that you're supposed to be serving. And I always hated, I'm not from California, but I always hated that Maxine Waters never lived in her district.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And it just always bothered me. And I think, listen, we're going to talk about some other issues here and let you go in a second. But I want, if you have a website or something for us to get your potential supporters and hopefully voters in next June and then November of 2026 so that we can put Chris Burnett in Congress in Maryland. Why don't you give us a couple scraps of information so we can send people your way?
Before I give you that web address, I was going to just respond to that last point you made. She lives in CD8 and she lives in a $3 or $4 million mansion, which is one of several homes that she owns. She's not having the day-to-day experience that most Western Marylanders are having. I'm a family of 6. We've raised 4 children on a single military income. My experience reflects the experience of most people in Western Maryland. And that is we struggle with inflation. We're struggling with the cost of living. We're having to make choices about groceries, sports, and activities for our kids. And all we want is the same opportunities for them that we had growing up. And that is to be recognized for their hard work, their achievement based on their success or failure in the classroom, their success or failure in fair sports, meaning girls playing girls, boys playing boys. And that experience that my wife and I are living is the experience of most Western Marylanders. And the idea that April McClain Delaney or Do-nothing Delaney is somehow representative of Western Maryland is just, it's false. So not only is she not in the district, she couldn't be more disconnected. So I know you wanted to hear my website, but
Yes.
I wanted to at least share that last point about.
No, that's important. And I just want to tell our listeners, again, if you're listening to this on Spotify and not watching on YouTube or Rumble, is that we have Chris Burnett here who is trying his darndest to make Maryland great again and to be the next congressman from the 6th District in Maryland. So please go and visit his site. Chris, why don't you tell our listeners and our viewers where they can find you, where they can donate, where they can volunteer?
Yes, burnettforcongress.com, where you can go You can sign up for our newsletter, you can sign up to volunteer, and you'll also have a link where you can donate to the campaign. And this campaign, again, not unlike, very much unlike, I should say, my opponent, it's going to be grassroots from the beginning. I don't live in a mansion. I don't have several houses, and I don't have a, uh, the ability to self-fund a $3 million campaign. So that grassroots level support is going to be absolutely essential to this campaign. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk through this tonight with you. And I look forward, hopefully, to come back again.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have you back again as we get closer to your primary, if you have one, and then to the general election in November. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, Chris Burnett for Congress. Let's move this former Marine. Let him continue his service to our country in Congress. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Well, everybody, we're really grateful to Chris Burnett for spending some time with us and just telling us what it's like to get your hands dirty, so to speak, and jump in and run for office, especially in states that may not be as conservative traditionally, and getting your message out there that there are different ways to govern and different policies that people are interested in. So we always want people to get out there like Chris is doing and put your name in the hat and see what happens. We need good people representing us in our constitutional republic. And in our constitutional republic, here's my segue here, we are, Congress has the role in allocating funds and budgets, and they are the purse, right? You always hear that Congress controls the purse. So you have President Trump's big, beautiful bill, made it through the Senate, caused a lot of Sturm und Drang, right? So a lot of turmoil for folks, and storm. What is it in German? It was Sturm und Drang, dark gloominess and storms. And then it turned out to be passed by the vice president, who came in and made the tying vote of 51. So he broke the tie. He broke the tie. It was 50-50. And now it goes back to the House because there were amendments in there. The House, my own stomping grounds. It's still going to be a fight, a little bit of a fight. There are a lot of things in there that people don't like, and there are a lot of things in there that people like. And so I guess I would just tell everyone that there are longer term benefits for this spending. I am a very fiscally conservative person, but I do see also the importance and the connection President Trump is making with being able to gin up our economy and jumpstart it, and bringing the extra revenues in, getting inflation down, getting interest rates down. That really creates a really great economic machine. And the phrase, sometimes you have to spend a little more money than you want to in order to make more money, I think it's true in this case. Plus, there are so many things that people wanted President Trump to do that he can't do for free. Whether it's border security, he has to pay for that. He has to pay for new agents. He has to pay for the wall. He has to pay for lots of things. So new immigration judges to expedite processes for people. Whatever we do with law enforcement that requires more resources to really put a dent in the amount of people here that shouldn't be here. So that's an important part. That alone. Also, putting money into our roads, our infrastructure, development, a lot of things. I mean, DOGE has done a good job of starting to look at things and try to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. There's a lot more that has to be done on that front. So as we speak today, we do not know exactly how the House is going to handle, with such a small margin in the House. If you get people that are intransigent and won't change their minds, or they're using, their threats to either not vote or to vote no, they vote present or they vote no, they can stop this thing from moving forward. I think many economists are starting to come around that there is real potential to really jumpstart the economy and really work on inflation and interest rates. Then you have the doom and gloomers on the other side that we're going to be in a recession in just a few months. So although economics is a social science, people do not agree on how this is all going to play out. So we'll have to wait and see. For us right now, we're watching the House I know Chip Roy has his congressman from Texas has a lot of doubts about the bill as it is right now. There's going to be a fight on this as well. But I know that the main message the White House has been saying, and they should say it over and over again, is that we need some money to make these things happen. Unfortunately, what people voted for President Trump, we can't get that done for free. And I know that he's trying to make that happen. So, not that there are not imperfections and issues in the bill. There are, but we'll see what happens, what kind of compromises they make in the House. And it's mostly the Republicans. We know how the Democrats are going to vote. There's no question about that. So it's the Republicans that are either in purplish states or light, or maybe pink states, but they're not necessarily all on board yet. So we'll see how that plays out. And then I just want to wish everybody, especially those like our last guest, Chris, and like producer Victor that serve our country in the military, wish them a wonderful 4th of July coming up. I can't believe, producer Victor, that in 2026 we're going to have the 250th anniversary of our country, so our birthday coming up, and that's going to be an amazing thing. We'll see how it all works out. But I just wanted to say a little bit about the big beautiful bill. We're going to continue to monitor it, see how it goes, see what it looks like at the end of the day after all the amendments and all the haggling, see what kind of deals are made. So again, I want to wish everybody a wonderful Independence Day coming up this week on Friday, and God bless till next time.
In a world full of noise, clarity is power. Stay informed, stay aware, stay top of mind.